This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert. You all ever heard of the saying, the elephant in the living room? Do you know of some elephants in the living room? In a congregation like ours, we have 21 different meetings every week. Many of them are 12-step meetings. And quite often the elephant in the living room is alcohol addiction, alcohol dependency, chemical dependency. We also probably have all been in a place where even homosexuality was the elephant in the living room that nobody talked about. I just heard about it this morning about someone who died at age 74, and when the family came to claim all of the things for the family, they went home and they found this portrait of he and his partner and their life story, and the great aunt took it home with her, or was going to. And the niece said, "Don't let her have it. She's going to destroy it." Because nobody knows that he was gay. They all suspect it's the elephant in the living room, right? But they don't talk about it. Well, I couldn't find an elephant, so we've got the moose on the altar. So if I refer to moose on the altar, that's the elephant in the living room, okay? The reason that I'm doing this is not because I have an agenda about getting all these elephants or these mooses out onto the altar. The reason I'm talking about it is because in today's gospel, Jesus deals with a huge moose on the altar. Jesus deals with one, and Jesus deals with it in an incredibly scandalous way. Do you know what that scandalous moose on the altar in today's gospel is? Grace. Jesus finds that God has shown grace so abundantly, and he spreads it out with such disregard for the deservedness of anybody that we should all be scandalized. Now, I have to tell you that in this particular passage, how you understand that depends almost entirely on how we translate one line. I'm grateful to David Lose, a professor at Luther Seminary in Minneapolis, for this, and Brian Stoffregan over in Yuma, and Kate Huey in Weekly Seeds. But the idea is that when Zacchaeus gets to Jesus, and when he is called down from the tree, he either says, "I will do this," or as each of these scholars that I'm looking at are listening to says, what he more likely said was, "I already and always give half of what I have to the poor. Whenever I find that somebody has been cheated by me, I already pay them back fourfold." Well, see, the first way of doing it, there's no scandal at all. He's a bad guy who turns good, and we all go home happy, right? But if indeed Zacchaeus has already been doing all this, he is a scandal to us. Why? Well, first of all, he's a rich man. Most of us in our common life today are used to rich people being honored and being treated as important. And so we have to understand that in that day, particularly among peasants, farmers, townspeople, rich folks were often the subject of scorn, because every one of those other people knew that the only way they got rich was by taking it from them. And so they didn't have much credibility at all. And then he was a tax collector. Have you ever heard this? "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And that inspires confidence, right? Mm-hmm. Well, and if it says, "I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help," even worse in those days. So a tax collector, and the chief tax collector had very little credibility. But here is Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, who has heard that Jesus is around, he wants to see him so badly, he embarrasses himself by climbing a tree. Can you imagine me going out in my robes and vestments and all of a sudden trying to climb a tree? That would be embarrassing. And Zacchaeus embarrassed himself, and then Jesus said, "Come down. Today I am going to be entertained at your house. There's the scandal. Jesus is going to his home. This person who is an outcast amongst his own people because of his collaboration with the Romans. This person who it is generally assumed by the people who don't have anything that he must have got something by cheating people. He's outcast for them. And Jesus says, I'm going to your house to dine. And do you know how the people deal with it? They treat it like the moose on the altar, like the elephant in the living room. The people treat it by not coming out and saying, Jesus, why are you doing this with him? They start grumbling. They go to their neighbor and they say, doesn't Jesus know? Doesn't. They start gossiping about it, and they start grumbling about it, and they start whispering about it. But you know, the whispers are never really that low. We all hear them, don't we? And the man, Zacchaeus, heard the whispers too. And so in response to all of those folks who were trying to say, this guy's not worthy, he said, wait a minute. I already give half of everything I have to the poor. I already treat the people who may think I've done them wrong scrupulous according to the law. And I am excited as can be to have Jesus come to my house. And Jesus says that today salvation has come to this house because this man also is a son of Abraham. See, at the heart of it is, this is the scandal. The scandal is that we believe that God waits around for us to give approval for people to be blessed by God. And that only the people who meet our criteria are the ones that are worthy of God's blessing. And occasionally, there are some folks who heretofore were not considered worthy, but they've shown themselves very penitent and everything else, and now we are gracious enough to let them know that they are worthy for a little smackerel of grace. That's how we're used to it, but that's not how God operates. And it's not unique to this particular passage. We have another rich man in chapter 18. He comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, well, how do you read the law? And the guy says, do this, but you lack one thing. Give away everything you have, come follow me, and yours is the kingdom of heaven. And the guy left because he had many possessions, it says. At least at that moment, he couldn't grab it. And then as they're coming into town, there is a blind beggar. The blind beggar hears all the buzz that Jesus is coming, and he wants to see Jesus, so he starts shouting out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And what does the crowd do? The moose on the altar, they say, shh, shh, you'll disturb him. Push him back to the back so he doesn't disturb anybody. We don't want to bother Jesus. But Jesus says, you, come here, bring him out. What do you want? I want to see. He says, you can see. And the guy rejoices and praises God and follows Jesus. Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus. Turns out Jesus wants to see Zacchaeus. And he says, Zacchaeus, come down. And Zacchaeus is so excited, he welcomes Jesus into his home with joy and celebration. Now, last Sunday, we had a wonderful celebration here. We had a celebration for about 30 gay and lesbian couples who have been in relationships for a long time. And I have to tell you that there are some people who look at that celebration a little bit like, gosh, the church finally got it, or we finally decided that gay couples were worth caring about, and here we've got a little bit of grace to give them. But what I have learned in sharing with the people who are involved in that, couples who have been together 50 years, 55 years, caring for one another in sickness and in health, is that God's grace has already been given through all that time, and lately the church has finally decided to recognize what God is already doing. It's not people showing up for scraps. It's people standing up and witnessing joyfully that God's abundant grace is available. And not just to me and not just to the group that I'm concerned about, but to you and to the people you're concerned about and to the people you know aren't getting anything. The grace that is shared by us in very little ways by bringing food for those who are in need, for making a place for them. These are all but little signs of the amazing abundance of love that God has in store for so many people. And so my hope is that when we read this story of Zacchaeus, we read it with the translation that I gave you. And instead of letting the moose just stay in the living room, we get rid of it, or on the altar, we get rid of it and talk about what's really going on. We talk about the scandal of God's amazing love for us and for the entire world that God has created. And we celebrate that, and we find ways to let people know. And if we run into people who look like they don't believe it could ever be possible for them, we rejoice and say, you don't know the Jesus I know. And here's a place where you can come and learn about him. Amen.